Hi everyone, let me share my slides. Okay, so thank you for joining me today for a session on how we created a learning culture here at Perimeter X, where I work. And when I say a learning culture, I mean instilling a healthy culture of debriefs and positive discussions that ultimately minimizes backfires internally. I'm excited to share with you our journey here at the DevOps Pro conference. My name is Amir. I lead the research and engineering team here at Perimeter X. And I'm an experienced breaker of production environments. And what we do, very briefly, and how it relates to the story. So we are a software as a service company. We provide solutions to protect modern web apps at scale against automated attacks from bots, malicious codes in client side, and so forth. Behind the scenes, where it's interesting on the DevOps perspective. So we have a cloud-based microservices environment, large scale, around 15,000 cores, 300 microservices, and like any production environment, we too see failures all the time. Today, we're going to cover our journey through the process of change towards creating a healthy and supportive learning culture by taking those failures in production that happen all the time and building on those. In a way, this is the essence of chaos engineering, as I see it. And while a lot can be said on the technical aspects of randomly breaking things to find gaps and loopholes within the system, reality can always surprise you. On my part, every production system I worked on experienced issues, sometimes due to code changes, other times due to third-party vendors, providers having their entire infrastructure crashing. Plentiful of examples. And that was leading us to seek ways to learn and improve constantly on how do we do things, how do we protect the system, and how do we provide the best service to our customers. And the way at least I see it, having a healthy DevOps culture really is a competitive edge at the end of it. So it's an important thing to dive into. Okay, so when I joined the company, I set a destination of wishing to see rapid changes, rapid deployment and changes, being able to provide the most up-to-date and adequate solutions. In our case, for example, it was in a world of moving target defense, where the scope of features changes all the time due to threat actors. Being able to deploy quickly was a major factor in our ability to provide a competitive product. And like I just said, in fact, oftentimes a good DevOps culture will be a differentiator and can act as a competitive edge for your company. So it is important to learn and seek ways to create a healthy culture, DevOps culture within the organization. We wanted to have zero downtime and have errors or mistakes happen only once, so we will have the chance to learn from them, but never twice. Twice meaning we didn't take the lessons and we didn't learn the first time around. So once is good, twice isn't. However, starting point wasn't that bright. We saw repeating issues, few repeating issues, minor things causing failures in production, either due to code changes or configuration changes, and being too prone to incidents in the underlying cloud environment, affecting our own stability. Those two factors were very concerning when we were looking at how we're going to grow and scale 10x ahead, 100x ahead. And when you think of it, if you have what might be a minor risk today, can likely be a catastrophic in the future. And that future can be next week if you're in a fast-growing company. So it's really important to do the root cause analysis and deep dive on any failure you see within your environment. Now, while those two were concerning, the last one, as I saw it, was the real one preventing us to improve, and that was the fear of judgment. Every time we had an incident and we were trying to do the process of learning from it, when we were diving into understanding an issue, they were pushbacks. Why do we ask so many questions? Do we have trust issues with our own engineers? Why don't we just let them do their job? They know what they're doing, and leave it as is. And that's a problem. If you have team members afraid or feeling they're being judged or generally just insecure in their work environment, they're going to underperform as a team, and you will not be able to learn and adapt, and you will definitely not be able to get the full value that you can get from a good engineering team. In essence, this is the whole point of this exercise, getting over those gaps and creating a healthy culture. Okay. So with the starting point in mind and the destination that we want to get to, we set off to establish a new process within the teams on how we analyze every kind of failure and what we do during the analysis. How do we conduct a debrief that I'm going to do a deeper dive into, and the follow-ups afterwards. Now, you can ask yourself, why focus on the process? And the reason I think it's really important to focus, first of all, on the process is because the process leads to culture, and the tools comes only at the end of it. And as I see it, like the great quote from Edward Deming, a bad system will be the good person every time. If we have the right people, and let's assume we have the right foundation of engineers, smart people, dedicated, who wants to solve problems the best way they can, if we fix the process, good things will happen along the way, and we can achieve great things with any existing team. Okay, so I want to start with an example that will lead into the discussion of the process. I'm sure any of us can, with a production environment, experienced either something similar or can at least relate to it in some way. So I'll start with the example and how it relates to the process here. You have an incident. A customer is complaining about something misbehaving in their environment. They think it might be related to you, so they're calling support. Support on our side is trying to analyze and understand, and after a while, realizing maybe they don't know what to do with it, or there might be a system failure somewhere, they will page the engineering team, as they should. The engineering team wakes up, usually because it's the middle of the night for them, because they're in a different time zone than the customer. And they wake up, they dive into the issue, they work to analyze what's going on. They will find a problem, and they will fix it. They might even resent the fact that they woke up and had to fix it in the middle of the night, but they will do it since it's their job. And they will go back to sleep and move on to other tasks the next day. If this is the end of it, then you're bound to get similar cases and experience similar issues again from similar root causes. Even if that specific problem was resolved indefinitely, you will have similar cases because you're lacking the process of learning from the incident and doing the follow-up. Now, you should ask yourself, why is it happening? What can you do better? What can you do to avoid seeing such an issue or any other potential case in the future? You have to set time to analyze after the fact. This is really the only way to make sure root causes are found and the process and problems are improved and lessons are taken from. I'll give another sample case here. Something that we had about a year ago. We had a code that was deployed into production by mistake. How can that be? That's a very odd occurrence. What we actually had was an engineer merging the code into the main branch. The code failed some tests, but it was late, and the engineer decided to leave it as is because you can keep working it in the morning since nobody is going to deploy the code. It might be in the main branch, but there is no deploy going to happen. He was the last one going home. Everything is safe. What he didn't know was that microservice that was never scaled before had a process added around it that will auto-scale it earlier that week. And that specific evening, there was a spike in usage, and system auto-scaled, and that specific microservice had more containers spinning up. The new containers obviously took code from the main branch and brought in the buggy code with it. Now here lies the issue. We can focus a lot on why the buggy code was merged into the main branch, why the autoscale was added and the engineer didn't know about it. But the fact is that if we focus too much on why certain employee did something, and doesn't understand why everything has happened, can't they understand the full scope of it, we'll miss the fact that, wait a minute, the process is flawed. How can we actually merge code into production without understanding it's going into production? In this specific example, there should be a meaning behind specific repositories and specific ways we manage code. Say a main branch should be, in their mind, always equals production, even if it's not deployed, since they think there is a manual process, tomorrow it might be automatic. So it goes down to the culture and process of how do you look at the work you're doing. So if you fix the process and understand the root cause of it, in this case, understanding how branches are used, we can align all engineers to understand that specific scenario and fix the root cause from that, moving on to any other team and microservice that we have. Now, in this specific case, the approach of how we merge code to main branch changed drastically. And it goes to the fact that if we fix the process and we don't overjudge why a specific employee did or didn't do something when they were just trying to do their job, and tomorrow it can happen to any other employee, it will help us become a better team and learn from mistakes. So how do we learn from the incident? There are 4 steps. It's a very simple process. It starts with the incident, and the more you become mature as an organization, the team will create a pseudo incidents, for example, from any minor thing that was misbehaving, a KPI that went the other way, an outage that didn't affect drastically on the service that you're offering, but breached some internal metric or an alert. And that's really the stage that you want to get to, where minor things will lead up to an incident analysis. But you have an incident, you provide immediate resolution to the issue. Then 72 hours afterwards, no more. And depending on how much time actually you had to sleep, or if it was during the weekend, we're going to do the debrief. And the debrief is essentially a meeting, a process. We're going to dive into it a bit more on the next slide. And 2 weeks afterwards, we will do a checkpoint, also a very crucial part of the process, to review action items that came out of the debrief. Make sure that things were incorporated, especially the immediate tasks. That's a very important part, and it's also a takeaway that we had as we learned why certain things were happening again and again. So with that, let's dive into the debrief. First, when we talk about conducting a debrief, it's not like a standard retrospect. The reason is it usually follows an incident when something failed, and maybe even failed drastically with a very severe impact. So the frame of mind of people going into the meeting is very different than, I would say, a standard sprint retrospective where you're just looking at things. When do you do the debrief? Like I said, every time you think the process or the system did not perform well enough. We ask a lot of questions. Questions I ask are, first of all, what happened? Let's have a very detailed timeline of events from the moment it really started, not the moment somebody complained, but or when the customer or somebody raised the bells and alarms, but the moment the issue really started to roll into production. For example, when I merged the code into the wrong branch, or when I changed the query, or when the third-party vendor updated their own status page that they were failing. And you ask next, what's the impact? Also, very important factor in creating a learning environment. It helps convey a message to the entire team that you understand what the actual impact is and you care about it, the end goal, and what was the cost of the issue. It's not just looking at the metrics. It could be cost, it could be customer affected or complaints. So you try to get a full scope as you can, and that is vital to help everyone understand why we're delving into the problem and why it is so important, like I said. It's not just that they woke up in the middle of the night or they were being paged and it was bothering them. You have to understand the full picture of where everything is related and how everything is connected. Now, after you have the story and the facts, you start to analyze and brainstorm how to handle the case better in the future. Two leading questions that I have to do that are the following. Did we identify the issue in under a certain amount of time? Let's say it's 5 minutes. Now, why 5 minutes? It's not just an arbitrary number. The time frame that you're setting will eventually define the type of solutions and fixes you put within your process and system and controls and protections. If we identify the issue in under 5 minutes, or maybe we didn't identify at all, this will define how well you want to design your system, and it should address any specific needs you have within your own story. Follow-up question is, did we fix the problem in under 1 hour? Did we fix it in under 10 minutes? Maybe it was resolved automatically and there was no point in us trying to analyze anything. We just need to align better the flow between the incident and the messaging. And once we have the answer no to any of these questions, the follow-up should really be, okay, we understand the full picture, we understand the impact, the timeline. What do we need to do? What do we need to change? What do we need to be able to add to the system or the process so we will say yes to any of the above questions? This part, while seemingly very simple, this process, this flow, led to a drastic cultural change over time. It was setting the framework in a way that helps convey to everyone the focus is on the process and the system. It's not about any specific person or employee. Whoever caused the incident today is really irrelevant. Tomorrow it can be a different employee. And this is setting the ground in how you create that learning culture. Now, any cultural change takes time, always. It's never a magical solution. In our journey, we had some things we had to resolve along the way. I already mentioned a few of the solutions and how we did it, and I'm gonna touch on a few more now in this part. First of all is lack of trust. A new manager comes in trying to instill a new process, trying to change the culture, can always lead to a lack of trust. They don't know you, who you are, what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve. It could be in the questions, perhaps. People could ask themselves, is there any hidden agenda behind that? How will it not become a blame game like we had before? And this is something that can completely be resolved if you do it properly and consistently. And by being consistent, I would even, going back to this part, at the first few months of doing this flow, I would start every meeting the same way, explaining to people the scope, what we're trying to achieve, what we're going to focus on, what it will not be, and with that, instilling the frame of mind of how this is going to happen, how these meetings are going to be conducted, and how we're going to focus on only improving and not about blaming anyone or diving into the wrong directions. Now, what often happens when you're trying to understand why a problem occurred, people might say he or she did something at fault when the real issue is something else, not following up on action items, for example, something that can be really annoying. You do the process, you review everything, you set action items, and then you have the same problem all over again a few weeks or months later. How did it happen? You see that action items were set, but they weren't being followed on. And once again, the solution can be very simple. Like I said, within the process we added checkpoints. If you had a debrief, you set checkpoint every 2-3 weeks, whatever the cadence is relevant in your case. And you make sure the immediate action items, the critical action items, were actually being handled. In my own personal way, what we do, we label each ticket in the ticketing system with the label saying debrief, and then we just do the monthly review of all the debrief items, like any other backlog review process, to see what is left open, might be relevant, maybe the system changed and moved on and we can remove items, and which one are still really high and important, and we should incorporate them into our work plans. Another critical move that we made to resolve future issues is implementing a proper communication on a very wide scale internally within the organization. We are publishing all our debriefs very widely within the company. They are organized in the same folder, the details of what happened, what we're going to do to make it better. It helps bridge the gap of trust that you might have and show that everything is very transparent and visible, both within the team and with other teams that might be affected indirectly from an incident that occurred. We also saw that if you are not asking the right questions, the focus would be on the problem, and we need to learn how to look broader at how things could be connected and relevant to see the bigger picture, because like I said in the code example, instead of just focusing on that specific repository, ask the wider questions. Do we have more repositories that have that gap that are being manually deployed, so the process of committing code into them could suffer the same potential errors in the future, and we want to avoid that. That's the whole purpose of creating the learning process. Okay, there are four main, if anything from this session I want you to take from, there would be these four main items and on how to conduct a debrief. The first one, the most important one in my mind, is to avoid blame. Avoid it altogether. And if you see it starting to happen within the meeting, you have to interfere and stop it politely, but immediately. Another is be calm when you do it, but you need to stop and make sure it's on track and the meeting go the way you want them to go. Because if there is a vision of how you want it to happen and how you want to see it moving forward, and you follow up the process and you're very consistent, eventually what we have today, it's just part of the culture. When a team has an incident, they're doing the debrief, they're spreading the word on their own in a very, very organized and a very calm way. Another one is to go in easy on the why questions. Now, even though I said it's important to understand why somebody did something, you need to make sure you're not over diving into it. And if you're asking somebody why they did something over and over, trying to unravel everything, you could create resentment or self-doubt within the engineers, and that's not something you want to get to. So it's a very delicate balance, and it can sound to them like you're being critical and judging in how they behaved when you're actually really trying to understand how specific things are happening. So we need to be very mindful on what they hear when you're asking those questions. Like I said, being consistent, a very critical part of creating a change in culture, in any culture, is to be consistent in how you do it over time. And the last one, if I can iterate it more, you need to keep calm. It's always important, especially when you're looking into things that failed. You need to stay calm. You need to show there is a path forward. It helps create a better change environment, and it helps convey that you're focusing on resolving the problems and not going into any, I would say, bad cultural behaviors. So avoid blame, go easy on the why questions, be consistent and be calm, and be consistent on all of the above. That's really important in creating that change in process. So first, I would say some of our most notable learnings, things they had with different debriefs over time. So I'm showing them, and I'll go briefly over those and what can be learned from. And you can see the tiny URL here. That's linked to our debrief format. Very simple, very straightforward, but if you want to have something to start with, so you can go into that and look at the template. First one, the most notable learning is human makes mistakes. While it's quite obvious, it means we need to focus on fixing the process and not fixing the people. That will never work, because let's assume we have good people, smart people working very hard, but everybody makes mistakes. So we need to design the process and the tools and all the protections around and all the learnings around the assumption that mistakes might happen. Can't assume that nothing will ever happen. Another, very technical, is gradual rollout. It's not a silver bullet. And I'm saying that because I often heard it in SaaS environments, in cloud environments. Let's add gradual rollout and it will solve all the problem. And it's not a holy grail of some microservices, large-scale production system. It's a great tool, something to be used, but like I said, not a silver bullet, and it will not resolve everything. And saying that it will miss a lot of problems that you need to resolve in different processes and tools. For example, I'm going to touch on in another one in a second. Establishing crisis mode processes, also a very important learning takeaway that we had. If you have a crisis mode, that maybe your support is the first one to witness, you need to have a crisis mode protocol so they will know who to page and wake as quickly as possible and not try to look for the pages for the phone number of somebody to call. Feature flagging. That goes hand in hand with what I just said about gradual rollout. Feature flagging in terms of handling errors quickly was a major component in how we improved our system stability. Something that can enable us to deploy change across thousands of containers. And then if there is a problem, we can just disable the feature instead of rolling back or redeploying a lot of code. And when we have thousands of Dockers, that's a really critical part. If you want to roll back very quickly, you need to have the right tools and features in place in order to support that. And it goes back to what I said in what's your specific use case and how you want to improve your system. Another is we always try to split changes that we do in something that if you have a loosely coupled microservices environment, where a lot of things communicate with one another, and some, when you change one thing, can't always be certain how everything along the pipeline will change, then you need to be very minded into how you do things. And the way we do that is we split a change in the system and in the behavior into two action items: adding a new behavior, and then once it's working, subtracting the old behavior. Never replacing in place, because essentially you're doing two changes at once. In our case, that was 100% leading to some kind of outage. So we never do in place changes, always splitting it two. Let's see. Okay, the number 7, looking for the 10x breaking point. Actually, I skipped one, behavior-driven development. So one way to resolve would be behavior-driven development. You're adding a new behavior, you have everything working with the new behavior, and then, like I said, reducing the old behavior completely. And then it really helps to make sure that the system works on the behavior that you want to achieve and not just on the specific unit tests or that might be missed. Looking at the 10x breaking point of your system, whatever that may be, that's also a very important learning that we took, and that it sometimes happens very rapidly. So the 10x breaking point could be next week if you're in a fast-growing environment, and then you really need to look into that and identify those potential gaps. And the last one is, it's good all around for other purposes like security and such, but treating config as code, not just infrastructure as code, but config as code as well. Config as code means that we can audit, rollback, and manage every change within the system, whether it's codes, infrastructure, or configurations, especially when the configuration really defines what the code will do. So the code isn't the full picture, it's only just part of the feature. And that's it. Thank you for listening. I hope I gave you something to use. And if you have any questions, either here on the chat, feel very free to ping me on any of these medium or ask. Did see one question. Let me see. Okay, I can see that, but somebody asked me about what's the difference between this perhaps and retrospective. So I touched a bit on that before. The retro usually focuses on the development lifecycle. Well, the debrief, first of all, is very structured. It's a lot more about how you set the meeting, especially when, like I said, you have an outage or something that was can lead to, I would say, a heating up discussion. So you go into it a bit very differently. And the retrospectives you usually do also, if you're in a good environment, you will do a retrospective also on things that were successful, not just failures. And the debrief will have a different set of questions and focus. And another was, what's the difference between this and doing like internal fuck-up nights where everybody shares stories? The way I see it is, it's another set of process, more of how do you convey the collective learnings of latest debriefs. They essentially create those war stories that you can bring and share within fuck up night, but it's not a replacement for doing the deep analysis of every specific incident and sharing that widely. And we share that with the document that can also be commented, because other people might have something to add or look upon, and it's not just the team that conducted the debrief. Any more questions? Let's see. No. Okay. Thank you for joining me and tuning in. I hope you had some learnings and takeaways from the session, and I wish you all an enjoyable rest of the conference. Bye now.